And we're back on the build phase. All right, so let's talk about Quarantine Cup 2. At this point, we do not have a finalist yet. The final table has been determined, but we have not seen that game take place. I'm out. I did not make it to the end, unfortunately. And I just want to talk about the matchups a little bit, and then I want to dive into some of the details about my deck that I didn't necessarily want to do like a breakdown of all of my strategy right before I fought my opponent. So there were a few things I kind of left out when I was going over the decks in general. So I want to start with the matchup between Ralph and Jose. Now, I had speculated, this game is actually available on C-Stack's YouTube channel if you want to check the game out. I had speculated that Jose having his latent mutations in the side deck could potentially end up really hurting him, because those are clearly there to deal with Senator Kelly and to deal with him right away before he turns into a problem. Didn't end up playing out that way. In game one, Ralph did not get Senator Kelly on turn one. He actually ended up with two of his Senator Kellys in the row due to Kate Pride's effect, as opposed to being able to actually draw them and play them. Now, Ralph Edwards attributed the poor draw to the shuffling technique, or the cutting technique. And actually, before I get into the matchups, I want to talk about this. So for top 8, what we needed to do was we shuffled our decks on stream. Everybody could see you shuffling your deck. I prefer the pile shuffle just because I don't have to trust my own ability to kind of jam the cards in there to fully randomize. Everybody has their own technique, but most of us use pile shuffle. After all the cards were shuffled, we had our deck, we cut it once, which traditionally, if this was a live event, you would present, or an in-person event, I should say, you would present your deck to your opponent and they would do that single cut. In order to ensure that there wasn't anything untoward happening, we did our single cut, and then the judge, which was either Bert or Stax for the games that I played, I don't know if they had anybody else help them judge anything in the top 8 or not, but they would then give you a number. It was, I think Bert said it was between 1 and 12, but then when I played Mitch, he got 13 one of them. So it's just random numbers. Mitch and I, because our top 4 match came together very last second. I did not think we were going to be able to play Sunday, and then things just worked out. I suggested that if a judge wasn't going to be able to be present, that we should just roll a D20, and that the D20 could kind of stand in as a way to, without having a third person involved, still ensure that, okay, we did the cut, and then we're putting these cards on the bottom. So what do I think of this? It is kind of a pain in the butt, especially when you have mid-game triggers like Ghost or, Jungle Hunter, anything that's going to trigger a shuffle in the deck. It is kind of a little bit of a pain to do whatever your traditional shuffle is, then cut, then wait for a judge to say, here's your random number, take that many cards off the top of the deck. Like, I can kind of get why that's annoying, but what I think we get for that nuisance is 100% assurance that the deck is properly randomized. Nobody's deck stacking. Nobody's shuffling in an underhanded way. And I think that's really extremely positive. And I can't pretend that the nuisance outweighs the positives. I just don't feel that way. I think that it would really suck to play a game and then have your opponent go, oh, well, you only drew those cards. It wasn't that you were lucky, it's that you stacked your deck. No, dude. You can see right here that my deck is not stacked. Ralph Edwards had a take on this where if you shuffle a deck, cut it, and then take a number of cards off the top, it guarantees a bad draw. And that is just not how randomness works. That is not how math works. I can understand that maybe anecdotally you've had it happen where you took 5 cards off the top of the deck and then, oh, bad draw, and then another time you did it. But we're talking about confirmation bias there. Random is random. If there are 60 random cards and you take 5 off the top of the deck and put them on the bottom, that does not guarantee, like, first of all, the deck doesn't know what a good draw or a bad draw is. Randomness doesn't go, oh, we're going to clump together some 3-drops after the deck has been shuffled, but only if we take 5 cards off the top of the deck will we clump together. No. None of that's reasonable. And I think going forward for serious tournaments, this degree of randomization, I think it makes a lot of sense. I know Ralph in particular said he doesn't want to play in any event that uses these kinds of shuffling rules. But frankly, I think that players might want to just do that anyway. Whether there's just, okay, I've got my deck, I cut my deck, and then roll a dice, and whatever number shows up on the dice, that's the number of cards that you send to the bottom. That seems like a really good way, particularly when we're not in person, and there is a little bit of wiggle room for some. I don't like saying cheating. I don't like that even. For the most part, I think this community is trustworthy, and we're all here to have a good time. And the idea that somebody would be cheating at a tournament that is literally just for bragging rights is, I'd like to think we're all a little better than that. So anyway, that is I guess my take on the top 8 shuffling rules. Yes, I kind of giggled at it, like, oh my gosh, how? And of course, we pick up the deck. Oh, you're not supposed to pick up the deck before you take those cards off the top. And I get it. And it is a little awkward, but I think on the whole, it brings something positive to the top 8 in that we can ironclad, without a doubt, we know for sure that those decks were properly randomized. Now, I am going to blame this cut rule for how bad my draws were in top 4, but we'll get to that in a minute. So anyway, Jose versus Ralph. Game 1, Ralph didn't get Senator Kelly, which is really bad. That kind of makes his deck fall apart. And Rogue was able to just kind of grind him out, which is about what you would expect in the matchup. That's what I predicted for the matchup. That did end up being what happened. In Game 2, Ralph did get Senator Kelly, and one of the things I noticed about his deck is that his daggers were in the sideboard, and I said that could be a real concern because everybody in the top 8 has caught on to the fact that Latent Mutation is probably the best turn 1 answer for a turn 1 Senator Kelly. Well, sideboards happen. Latent Mutations come in for Jose, daggers come in for Ralph, and Ralph sat there on turn 1 thinking for a while. And the commentary was, oh, he must not have Kelly, because if he did, he would have slammed him. Well, what I think Ralph was actually thinking about was, do I play dagger now, or do I play Kelly now? And the calculation is, your opponent sideboarded some stuff in. You don't know exactly what he sideboarded in, but it's something, and you have to assume. And Ralph is a skilled enough player that he had to have assumed that the Latent Mutations were coming in from the sideboard and that Jose was going to have access to that tool. And I guarantee the calculation Ralph was trying to make there was, what are the chances that Jose drew 3 of these cards out of his 60 plus a blue to activate it? So he basically needs 2 separate cards out of the total pool on turn 1. What are the chances? I'm just going to go for it. And Ralph went for it with Senator Kelly. On turn 2, Ralph played dagger, but then it was too late. The original drop Senator Kelly had already been Latent Mutation away. Jose did not pay a penalty whatsoever for having those Latent Mutations in his sideboard. Game 1 went his way. Game 2 went his way as well. So Ralph got ground out by the Rogue, and he got beat by the draw, which, considering how often Ralph talks about consistency not being a problem for him, it was a little bit funny to see him get beaten by his own deck. Of course, Ralph does not accept that he was beaten. He blames the cut and says that he had the better 60 cards. Okay, man. Okay. So Mitch versus Robbie. I did not get to see this match, and no recording was made of it because apparently Mitch is really bad at recording things, which I will get to in a minute. So I know this was a 2-0 series. I don't know the specifics of what happened, but given how Robbie's deck is kind of a do-nothing deck for a while, and Mitch's deck is a little bit also kind of a do-nothing deck, but less of a do-nothing deck, and Robbie was all in on this complicated multi-card combo, whereas Mitch, at the end of his game, just has some bombs to play. I'm not surprised. This matchup went the way I predicted. Oh, I should say that the Ralph Edwards versus Jose matchup, I did not predict that Jose would win that. I thought Ralph was going to take that one, but when you play a combo deck, sometimes you don't draw the cards you need. Smallwood versus Vern. This was Rogue, designed to hyper level with the calls, the rogue SCs, the solo. All of this is designed to get rogue leveled up. And in both games where Smallwood went up against Vern, rogue was level 3. I think on turn 2 in both games 1 and 2, and he just absolutely ran over Iceman. It's just the way it goes, man. Particularly a rogue that levels this fast. In game 1, Smallwood did play the Nullifier, targeting range, which really, uncalled for. Uncalled for. You were already in very good shape in this matchup against Vern. The decks, it's just kind of the way the decks lined up. And similarly, my match against Ralph Cole, my deck just lined up really well. So we're going to kind of glance here. Notice he's got 0 4-drops, only the 4 5-drops, and only 2 6-drops. So there's this dead spot in kind of the mid-range turns where Ralph Cole's deck just doesn't do anything. Now, if he gets the power-ups that he needs to level up before he hits those dead turns, that's kind of okay. There's really no big deal there. And in my testing, any game where Rachel Summers was able to level up prior to turn 3, so turns 1, 2, or 3 level up, I lost, I think, all but one of those games in my testing. In the games where he did not level up on turns 1, 2, or 3, I won all of those games in my testing. I think I did a total of 42 games, and I think he leveled up turns 1, 2, and 3 5. I'd have to go back to my notes to be sure, but it was something like that. It was a very small number of games where he was able to actually get the level up. And when we played, it really didn't go any different than that. So my plan here was to just be as aggressive as possible. When I sideboarded in, Shadowcat did nothing for me the entire event. That card was in there to deal with Cape Pride aggro, which just didn't show up. So this was a completely wasted slot in my sideboard. Kind of sucks. The Los Angeles, the Wakandas, and the Invisible Boys came into my deck in between games, and I just cut out my top end. Now, I did want Jungle Hunter because I wanted to make sure I could stealth to a back row for that last wound if I needed it. But Dark Phoenix, Thanos, these cards aren't doing anything for me. Iron Man, these cards aren't doing anything for me against Ralph's deck. So my plan was to just be as aggressive as I possibly could. I learned pretty quickly that using Latent Mutation to target Ralph's Lambert would turn his Think Agains into just dead cards in his hand. I also learned that Latent Mutation targeting Wasp, instead of him he'd sit there and think, oh, I'm safe behind 2 attacks, he's going to need 3 attacks to get to my main character. Well, 1 Latent Mutation then gives me 2 swings at the main character. And that's basically the way it played out. I did make one mistake in game 2 where I had conditions in my deck for playing Victoria Hand. Now this card, you can look at her, and you heard the commentary if you watched the match between me and Ralph. The commentary was, oh man, he's throwing those Victoria Hands out. I think I'd save those. Well, in my experience, in the matchup, my healing just did not matter that much. Generally, I needed to heal exactly once to get through a game, occasionally twice if Ralph got lucky with the power-ups and the game went long, or I sputtered out in mid-turns because I missed drops. There were situations where I would need to heal twice, but generally 1 heal was all I needed to get to the end of the game. And what I discovered is that if I played the Victoria Hands aggressively and just basically played her for the agent, and then the 1 attack is relevant, it can take out match, it can take out match, but sometimes having her as an attacker is relevant, not very often, but the agent was more important to make sure that, I don't want particularly in game 1 when I've got like Dark Phoenix and Thanos and these essentially dead cards in my deck. I don't want to see turn 9. I don't want to see turn 8 at all. Like, I just want to wound him down before he has a chance to start playing things like Proteus, which could actually turn the game into his favor. So in game 2, I threw a Victoria Hand out there because I had a trophy area in my hand, and I just initially thought it was a school. I don't know what happened there. I thought, okay, my condition for throwing out an early Victoria Hand was that as long as I had 1 other instance of healing in my hand, I didn't have to worry about using her for her power, and I could just use her for agent. And that served me pretty well. However, again, in game 2, I threw that one out there, and I darn near ended up in trouble. Like, I'm not sure that Ralph would have had the power up he needed to put that wound on X-23 the turn. I'd have to go back and look at it, but he got me up to 2 wounds unexpectedly, and I top decked a Victoria hand, which allowed me to heal, and that put the game out of reach. So my match against Ralph went largely the way I thought it would. I think Ralph chose a very high rolly deck with kind of a low probability of high rolling. Now, admittedly, if he were to draw all 3 of those power-ups in his opening hand, he could just steamroll me, because getting his character up to 9 defense on turn 1, X23 can't hit that. I can't use a latent mutation on it. I can't use Net Launcher until turn 3 at least, because I got to get the Primeval down, then have a turn to get the Net Launcher down, and that also requires me drawing a blue. So any game where he gets those early power-ups, it's not even so much the level 2, because the level 2 is only a 6/6, but the level 2 plus the 3 power-ups puts him out of reach for any of my supporting characters until turn 7, which is a big deal. So I knew I had to avoid that, and there were actually some games in testing where I would get the nullifier out, and if I had a turn, particularly after turn 4, if I could get Snowman down with his 7 defense and then put a nullifier on him and nullify Powerful Heritage so that Dark Phoenix and Phoenix couldn't be used to power up Rachel, he didn't really have the things in his deck that he needed to stun the 7 before I could just kill him. So that's how the game went. I think every single top 8 match has been 2-0, I think. Okay, so me and Mitch, I went into this fight with Mitch very much being aware that I was the underdog. I put the chances of me it was like 60-40 in favor of Mitch, and the games didn't play out much differently than I expected them. I was a little frustrated that in both games I just could not draw locations. I think in game 1 I played 5 cards face down in my row. Plus, I have to discard a card when I recruit Snowman, so that puts me in a position where it's like I have nothing in my hand. I just can't do anything. Very frustrating. So I thought I needed a slightly above average or better draw. I needed to be able to probably hit on turn 6 was really important to get a ghost with a Net Launcher out. A Net Launcher, so one line I liked was getting a Net Launcher on turn 3 or 4 and putting Nimrod face down and just dealing with his board until I had things that were big enough to deal with the leveled up Nimrod. That could have worked. But I have to draw really a bunch of stuff. And the thing about Mitch's deck is, while it is a little bit thin on some of these middle turns, you can see this curve has some places where you're going to be way under like 50% chance to draw that on the turn. So there were games that I played when I was testing against this deck where he would just whiff 4, 5, 6, 7 and just wouldn't have anything to play. That's not every game. And Ahab does fix that a little bit, because you play out an Ahab and then you can have 2/2 drops on turn 4, or you can set up your turn 5. This card really does help kind of cover this. So his curve is not as flimsy or unreliable as it looks just based on the cards that are in the deck. Ahab is just a tremendous card. So another line that I had to pay, really I had a very small number of lines that were going to lead to victory. I needed to be able to not have to recruit a bunch of characters to the board, because once Nimrod's an 8/8, my main character can't put wounds on him anymore. So I needed to be able to attack into Nimrod with my main character and have him not plot twist his way out of it. In game 1, I think he played all of these. I think it was 3 shocks maybe and 2 fine cover. So not all, but then 2 mutant control acts as well on back-to-back turns, which just backbreaking. I just can't recover from that. My deck is very reliant on my character abilities. I made myself weak to combat interaction because I had such solid abilities in my deck, and that's what I was choosing to rely on to try to fight for the board and to try to control things to force it into my game plan. Mitch, 100%. I think these were more targets against Pixie Max and Kelly. These can turn off those combo decks, but the same kinds of things that you want to do to be able to turn off those combo decks, unfortunately, take away my ability to fight for board. So his deck lined up extremely well with my deck. It didn't help that I missed turns, that I didn't have my resources and that I wasn't really able to recruit things. I did see one of the comments on the C-Stacks Discord was that, oh, well, I would have played this as an aggressive matchup and tried to level Nimrod as fast as possible. And in my experience, it just never worked out. Yeah, I can heal, but once Nimrod's an 8/8 that can start getting additional benefit for the attacks that I declare, that hurts me. I found that the games that I won against the deck, I won because his curve had some holes in it, and I was able to stack wounds on Nimrod. So I needed my hand to be above average, and I needed Mitch's hand to be below average. And even in that situation, I would say it's 50-50. So like my best scenario against this deck requires this deck to draw poorly, my deck to draw hot, and I still had a chance of just straight up losing the game. Nimrod's ability to dig himself out of the early hole that I could put him in, I mean, he healed 3 wounds game 1, 2 wounds game 2. I just couldn't ever really make meaningful choices. Now, game 1, I played Dark Phoenix, and if that Dark Phoenix would have been able to have a power, I think Mitch was in trouble. Even with him mutant control acting my Dark Phoenix, I think I was okay, but my next turn was playing Jungle Hunter, and he mutant control acted my Jungle Hunter, and that just completely shut everything down. I was going to try to net launch or something, but there were no more superpowers at that point, and it was pretty much over. The back-to-back MCAs and the multiple defensive plot twists. I mean, if you erase the number of wounds, so each one of these defensive plot twists, when he uses it, protected him from a wound and let him heal a freaking wound because of regeneration. So shock to the system being essentially a 2 wound value. I mean, had those plot twists not come down, he wouldn't have had the healing, plus he would have had an additional wound. Like, I would have killed him. But, you know, like anybody going, oh, I would have won if I didn't lose, that's pretty silly. I'm only offering this as analysis of what I saw as my lines to victory. I'm certainly not taking anything away from Mitch. Major congratulations to Mitch, and I'm actually really excited for him. While, of course, I would have preferred to win the game, I'm actually really excited that Mitch is going up against Smallwood in what I think might be a favored matchup for Nimrod. I think it would be really cool. Mitch is a player that I don't think gets enough credit for how solid his gameplay is and how interesting his deck builds are. So if I'm going to lose to somebody, I wouldn't have minded losing to anybody in the top 8 except for Ralph Edwards. Got to keep my streak going against that guy. So that's kind of my analysis of the games that have happened. As far as the game that's coming up, we've got Mitch against... Here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to try to get both deck lists up here. We've got Mitch against Smallwood for the finals. So what does Rogue want to do? Now, Rogue having her own Mutant Control Act, Inhibitor Callers, and Sentinels might play into it because this Dark Phoenix, this late game stuff, seems like it could be very problematic for Rogue. So Smallwood's Rogue tops out. Really, I mean, this 8-drop is here, but if a Dark Phoenix is able to come down, this 8-drop is blank, basically. Floki is... While she can fight, she's not a card you really want to have to fight with. So she's really there, I think, to generate the card draw, and to, if you're putting power-ups on your Rogue, you really want to make sure your Rogue is bigger than your Loki, even at the, at turn... Well, I guess with how quick this deck can level, we're looking at Rogue possibly being leveled up on turn, all the way to level 3 on turn 2. So if he's an 8/8 on turn 2, and Mitch is trying to keep his 5 health alive by shock to the system and find cover, these are not going to be enough, these 2 plot twists. I mean, you're going to have to double them up, and if you're dropping, 6 combat swing to try to deal with an 8 attack that's coming in, how much? And plus, I forgot about God Strength. So if on turn 2 Rogue is level 3, Nimrod probably has 1 or maybe 3 experience points at most. He's going to be 3 defense when Rogue swings in. So giving +6 would get him over Rogue, except God's Strength also benefits Rogue, so that's 10. So he'd need 3 of these plot twists to be able to actually save Nimrod from a turn 2 level 3 Rogue. Now that's assuming things go pretty optimally for Smallwood. It's possible that the Nullifier could come down, take away that flight, and then some of these defensive cards that he has start to get in the way. I mean, if Nimrod levels, I think that certainly puts Mitch in the place where he can try to survive into this late game. And surviving into the late game is going to be a big deal. I think he has a better late game package than Rogue does. And if Exodus, say, comes down on turn 8 and gets Mutant Control acted, then Mitch gets to use Dark Phoenix the next turn. Taking away keywords is going to hurt Rogue. It's going to hurt a lot of things in this deck. Taking away levels is going to hurt Rogue, but I don't think he can afford to do that with how weak Nimrod is at level 1. I think he has to take away keywords, and at that point, Nimrod and Rogue are even. Now, Rogue is going to have the ability to power up a lot more, but if it's 8-8 to 8-8, find cover, shock to the system looks a lot better than a power up. But do you have to burn through these cards early in the game in order to keep yourself alive to be able to level up? Obviously, Smallwood's going to want to play solo early. Inhibitor Caller is a nice stop to that. Iceman is going to be problematic if he can just keep chain freezing Rogue down the way Mitch was chain freezing X23 down. Particularly if you let Rogue get that. So Rogue is going to go first game 1, almost for sure. So Rogue goes first, puts a wound on Nimrod, levels up, and then turn 1 on Nimrod's side, he freezes Rogue out and then heals that wound away. That's not great. Darkhold did nothing in my matchup against Mitch. I can completely see why it would be good given how important these plot twists are to survivability and then to the breaking your opponent's game strategy. So I'm really looking forward to this. I would like to make sure that this match actually ends up being saved in a way that we can watch it. I had a whole conversation with Mitch about how he was going to be the one recording our game yesterday, and then he decided Stax was going to record it instead. So nobody did. So nobody recorded the game yesterday, which is really disappointing. As much as I'm not a huge fan of having games that I lose out there in the world forever, I do think being able to watch it and look at the lines, and particularly look at the way this deck played and matched up against my deck, like there's value in that. I actually like watching all my games again because I think I can, even games that I win, I think I can learn from them and become a better player. So this kind of sums up where the top 8 is at. How do I feel about this event overall? Okay, is this the 10th week or the 11th? We're either 10, I think we're 10 weeks into this event, and I feel just a little bit burned out. Now, there was some drama that took place over the course of this event that I think made things more stressful, maybe is the right word. It made things more annoying than they needed to be. There were some instances where, particularly after my match against Ralph, so I will say that having Ralph telling people that he let me win when we played in August was a little bit irritating, and I get that that's like his whole deal is being the heel and you're the jerk if you let it get to you, but like, come on, man, that's not a cool thing to say. You let me win. That's so when I faced him in the Swiss rounds of Quarantine Cup, it felt like there was a little something on the line there. And it is annoying that instead of being able to meet the Dark Lord with the same kind of energy that he puts out and, kind of tease and trash talk that victory, that it turned into this whole thing like, oh, I've been accused of cheating and how dare anybody say that. And that sucked. Like, I think it's completely okay that Ralph was upset by it. I think it's reasonable that anytime somebody's accused of cheating that they get upset by it. But like, it's an online tournament. We're all doing the best we can. I think the real variable here was that everybody paying $5 to join in made everybody take it just a little bit different seriously. Like there was a little bit more on the line, and that might just be a mistake for these online tournaments until we have a way to play digitally where the game client prevents deck stacking or any kind of cheating. we have to jump through some hoops. We have to do something to ensure a level playing field, not just because people don't want to be cheated, but because people don't want to be accused of cheating. If there are mechanisms in place that absolutely ensure that you couldn't possibly be cheating, such as the deck cut rule that was implemented in top 8, then it insulates and protects you from those accusations. And I think that's a positive thing. Yes, again, I'm not saying it's not a little bit tedious or a little bit of a nuisance to have to jump through all those hoops, but like, what's more annoying? Being accused of cheating when you didn't cheat, or being cheated, or that's on one side of the ledger, and on the other side is you roll a dice after you cut your deck and say, okay, this number of cards goes to the bottom, and that way everybody can see, it's right there on the screen, everybody knows this deck is randomized. Of course, there are other ways people could cheat, but I don't want to get into all that. So the formats. I went into week 1 with the intent of taking Quarantine Cup 2 at like 30% seriously. I wanted to play Sister Grimm. She was legal in the format. I had this cool combo that I wanted to work out, and I lost at the top of my opponent's turn 3. I played exactly 2 turns of that game, and that sucked sufficiently badly that I was like, okay, I'm not going to have fun in this tournament. I'm going to come in here and try to win some games. And that's what I did for the rest of the event. I built whatever decks I thought were going to be most potent. I get that there's like this mockery of Groot in the cosmic format, but he does pretty good for me. I did end up dropping 1 game with Groot in the 2 main character format. And again, I think I made a very similar mistake in the top 8 of this event as I made in the last round of Swiss, which was I was concerned enough about the Kate Kelly matchup, and maybe there's a little bit of PTSD from Scott Cozzolino playing that on me in round 1, where it's like, I've only seen 9 cards or 11 cards, and the game's over? This is stupid. Like, I hate that feeling, and I didn't want to lose to Pixie Max, so in top 8 at least, I tilted my deck very heavily to have good matchups against those combo decks, and that left some holes. Combat interaction was a big hole in my deck, which Mitch was able to prey on. Similarly, in my last round of Swiss matchup, I went in very prepared for Senator Kelly, and I got a different kind of combo that kind of threw me off. And it had a couple different attack vectors that I was worried about, and ultimately I gambled incorrectly. I should have played around the direct win condition instead of playing around the disruption that I was worried Smallwood had. So that was a little bit of a bummer. But that's also just one of those things that as a player you kind of need to know yourself. Like, I don't like feeling outraged and losing to combo decks and uninteractive waves, especially combo decks that can go off so early, makes me feel outraged. So I definitely built my deck around the sort of thing like this. Losing to Nimrod isn't going to piss me off. Not at all in the way losing to Kate Kelly would have pissed me off. Some of those middle rounds of Swiss, the Monster Mash format was surprisingly fun. And I think part of what made it so fun was that it was such a linear format. A lot of what was going on in that format came down to how you were declaring your attacks and how well-tuned your deck was built in terms of feeding you characters on curve. It was a very turn sideways, decide the game on combat kind of format, and I liked it a lot. Now, I know Senator Kelly was active in basically every round of this tournament, and people got wins with him, so it wasn't only a turn right deck format, but very much. The 2MC thing is wild and crazy, and I don't know if I love it or hate it. I think if I didn't have to worry about Kate Pride being one of the potentially played MCs, I would have loved it a lot more. I think Kate Kelly warps that meta pretty heavily, like really heavily, and Kate Pride Jessica Jones with Senator Kelly is just one of the least fun decks to play against ever. Maybe it's pretty brutal. But that's not really a knock on the format. That's just, this is the card pool we have, and I'm not a big fan of that particular card interaction. So that's going to be true regardless of the format. I don't think that says anything about Quarantine Cup 2 as an event. I would give this event an A, an A+. I think it was really well done. I think it was really well run. I don't think Stacks fully understood how draining and difficult it was going to be to navigate 2 months plus of 40 people, and particularly with the last little bit of this, arguably the most important part of this event, falling during his finals week. So I think Stacks deserves just a tremendous amount of praise for navigating kind of some of the dramatic, unfortunate stuff that happened during the event, navigating the obvious things like, hey, my opponent hasn't showed up, what do I do? Like, there's a lot of the stuff that TOs have to deal with. And for each individual player, it's like, well, I have one issue. I need an answer for my one issue. Yeah, but all 37 other dudes also have one issue, and you're all asking the same person. So it's a lot. I fully understand how it can be a lot. So I think Stacks did a fantastic job. I think Bert did a great job. The weekly recap things are something that I have always wanted to do for league play. And it's just too much. It's just another thing to have to think about and have to do. And when you're running the league already, that's almost a part-time job in and of itself. So it was really cool. And being able to watch those weekly recaps was definitely a high point in not every week, but across many of the last 8 weeks, being able to catch up on how everybody else's games went. And there's something really awesome in having an active versus scene. It's kind of what we wanted to try to capture in league play. It's kind of what we wanted to try to capture in fight nights. And this has been a heck of a year. I can't sugarcoat it. It's been a brutal year. So I'm hoping to get fight nights started again, and the new season of Build Phase League Play is going to be starting up here at the tail end of Quarantine Cup 2. We'll roll out the sign-up sheet for that, but I'm going to wait until after the finals for QC2 are over. So in conclusion, I'm really glad that I participated in this event. I do feel a little frustrated that I came up short again. I can't ever seem to win an event, but man, you can't win them all. And if I'm going to lose to somebody, losing to this weird, unplayable MC piloted by somebody I have a lot of respect for, like Mitch, that's a fine way for me to go out. So thanks to everybody who put their effort in, both in terms of building decks and participating in this event, as well as the effusive praise I've already shoveled towards the event runners. This has been a great way to sort of make up for missing all the major events this year. We've had a lot of big names involved in this Quarantine Cup too, and it really, I think it gave the whole community something to pay attention to, or at least the competitive players. I know not everybody's a competitive player, and it would be cool to have more publicly known things that are put out there for the casual players, which brings me to Jason Roosevelt has been organizing the first of its kind casual versus meetup. I did see in the chat that the first one didn't go that great, but like the first anything generally doesn't go that great. So I think that's a great service that he's trying to provide to the community by encouraging the casual players to have a night when, hey, let's bring our just for fun decks out and play. Because a lot of our community, while it's a very small number of players who actually play in the competitive scene, a lot of the content that's produced and a lot of the events that take place are all bent towards that competitive player, which again is a minority of the community. I don't really know what to do to encourage more casual players. I did a season of Build Phase League Play where it was called Kitchen Table and it was meant to be casual, and the competitive players who played it complained that people were playing nonsense decks, and what's the point of sitting down to play if the guy across from me isn't even playing the game because their deck is so absurd. And the casual players complained that there were people who were bringing really serious try-hard decks into the casual format, and this is supposed to be Kitchen Table, so nobody was happy. Now, part of that might have been my fault in that I continued to track wins and losses. I mean, I feel like to make a league into a thing, you want to have some kind of stake, something to play for. Maybe not every player feels that way, but at least when I tried to do a casual league, I still wanted to track wins and losses, and that incentivizes people to play better stuff. So I don't know that I have the solution. I think Jason's idea of a casual meetup makes a lot of sense, and I hope it takes off, because I would like for the casual players to have ways to engage, since nobody's getting together with their friends this year for the most part. So I guess I'm done rambling at this point. So Quarantine Cup 2 thumbs up. Good luck to Mitch and Robert in the finals. And until